The dream looked perfect. Have you ever seen a poster so perfect that you believed stepping into it would magically fix everything? That was America to me. Before I arrived, the American dream looked like a model home, warm yellow lights, a flawless green lawn, a smiling family framed by a wide window. Everyone said the same thing, work hard and everything will fall into place. What no one mentioned was that this house might not have a solid foundation for someone just walking in. On my first day at the airport, standing in the middle of the crowd, I felt something strange, excitement mixed with invisibility. No one stared at me. No one rejected me. America simply didn't care who I was. It sounds like freedom, but for the human brain, prolonged indifference can be more stressful than rejection. Psychology tells us our brains need clear social signals to feel safe. Here, those signals were faint, like a radio station you can't quite tune into. I began my new life by doing everything right. I worked early, came home late, saved money, and didn't complain. From the outside, I looked like a success story immigrant, disciplined, grateful, low drama. Inside, though, something quietly drifted out of rhythm. You might know this feeling, the one where everything looks fine, yet you keep sighing for no clear reason. Your brain calls this cognitive dissonance, the tension between expectation and reality. Your heart just calls it exhaustion. Climate shock was the first thing I underestimated. It sounds trivial until you live it. Long winters, short days, unstable seasons. My body felt off. My sleep grew shallow. My mood dropped for no obvious reason. Science explains this well. Lack of sunlight disrupts circadian rhythms and serotonin levels. Many immigrants experience mild seasonal affective disorder without realizing it. Instead, they think, something is wrong with me. No, nothing is wrong with you. Your nervous system is adapting to a completely new environment. Then came culture. In the U.S., people are polite, but politeness doesn't equal closeness. Everyone asks, "How are you?" but few wait for an honest answer. Your social brain, the part that detects belonging, starts to panic quietly. You talk, smile, follow the rules, yet feel like you're standing outside a party you were never invited into. This creates background stress, the kind that doesn't break you instantly but slowly drains you. I remember driving home at night, wide roads, soft streetlights, an eerie calm. And I'd think, is this it? Did I get what I wanted? That question wasn't as dangerous as the next one, or did I want the wrong thing? The American dream, as advertised, promises success through independence, big houses, nice cars, personal freedom. What it doesn't advertise is the psychological cost of leaving your original ecosystem behind. The human brain hates uncertainty. Back home, even when life was hard, I understood the unspoken rules, who belonged to whom, what was acceptable, what felt normal. In the U.S., the rules are clear on paper but blurry in emotional life. I began questioning myself. Why did I still feel empty if I was doing everything right? Left unchecked, that question turns into self-blame. You start believing you're ungrateful, weak, or incapable of happiness. The most dangerous part of this phase is not having language for your pain. When you can't name the problem, your brain assumes the problem is you. I used to sit in front of the mirror and wonder if the American dream was a sophisticated illusion. Later, I realized something deeper. The dream isn't fake, but it's not designed for every nervous system to enter smoothly. A psychologist once said, "You didn't fail because you dreamed wrong. You're tired because you dreamed without context." That sentence hit me hard. The American dream was built on America's history, climate, culture, and policies. When you step into it without a psychological map, you think you're lost, when in reality, you're just missing the legend. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, pause for a moment. You don't need to fix anything yet. Just acknowledge this truth. Feeling fine on the outside but not okay inside is real. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human with a nervous system trying to survive inside a dream that shines very bright lights. At its core, the problem wasn't that the American dream lied to you. The problem was that you were sold a poster, not a map. Climate shock, body shock. The first real argument I had with America wasn't about money, language, or culture. It was with the weather. Quiet, relentless, and impossible to negotiate with. Climate doesn't announce itself as a problem, you feel it before you understand it. Your body notices long before your logic does. And when your body is confused, your mind soon follows. Back home, weather was a background detail. Seasons changed, but they didn't hijack my nervous system. In the U.S., the climate felt personal. Winters were longer, darker, heavier. Sunlight disappeared earlier, and days seemed to fold in on themselves. I started waking up tired even after full sleep. Motivation dropped for no obvious reason. Small inconveniences felt disproportionately irritating. At first, I blamed discipline. Then mindset. Then myself. That's the trap. When biology changes, we moralize it. Science tells a different story. Human bodies are deeply regulated by light exposure. Sunlight affects serotonin, melatonin, and cortisol, chemicals responsible for mood, sleep, and stress regulation. Reduced daylight disrupts circadian rhythms, making the brain believe danger is near. Historically, darkness meant vulnerability. Your nervous system doesn't know you're safe in a heated apartment with Wi-Fi. It only knows signals. Fewer signals mean higher alert. Higher alert feels like anxiety, fatigue, or emotional numbness. What made it harder was the silence around it. No one talks about climate shock as emotional trauma. Especially not immigrants, who are expected to be grateful, resilient, and endlessly adaptable. Saying the weather is affecting me sounds weak in a culture that celebrates toughness. So I swallowed it. Pushed through. Told myself successful people don't complain about seasons. Meanwhile, my body kept score. Cold changes behavior. You go out less. You socialize less. You move less. Each reduction seems minor, but together they shrink your world. Studies in behavioral psychology show that reduced movement and social interaction increase rumination, the mind's habit of replaying negative thoughts. That's how climate quietly collaborates with self-doubt. Not dramatically. Incrementally. One canceled plan. One evening indoors. One more night scrolling instead of connecting. Summer didn't fully fix it either. Heat came with its own stress. Extreme temperatures raise irritability and reduce cognitive flexibility. The body expends energy just to maintain internal balance. That's energy you don't have left for patience, creativity, or emotional regulation. You start snapping at people you love. You withdraw. You feel off without context. Without understanding, your brain fills the gap with a familiar explanation: something is wrong with me. I remember standing outside one winter morning, breath visible, fingers numb, wondering why everything felt heavier than it should. Life wasn't objectively worse. Yet my internal experience was darker. That's when it clicked, this wasn't failure. This was physiology. Climate wasn't just outside my body. It was inside my bloodstream, my hormones, my sleep cycles. Ignoring it didn't make me strong. It made me confused. Neuroscience explains adaptation as energy-intensive. Every unfamiliar stimulus requires processing. New temperatures, new daylight patterns, new routines. Immigrants often underestimate how much energy this constant adjustment consumes. You think you're tired because you're lazy or unmotivated. In reality, your nervous system is working overtime recalibrating. Chronic recalibration without rest leads to burnout. Burnout isn't dramatic collapse. It's slow emotional flattening. Understanding changed my relationship with myself. Instead of forcing productivity, I started observing patterns. Mood dips correlated with weather shifts. Sleep quality tracked daylight exposure. That data replaced shame with strategy. I began using light intentionally, morning walks, brighter indoor lighting, consistent sleep schedules. Simple actions, grounded in biology, produced noticeable relief. Not happiness. Stability. Stability comes first. Psychologists emphasize that naming a stressor reduces its intensity. When the brain understands a cause, it stops scanning for threats. Climate shock went from invisible enemy to manageable variable. That shift alone lowered baseline anxiety. I stopped interpreting low-energy days as personal failure. They became signals. Signals asking for adjustment, not judgment. The deeper lesson wasn't about weather. It was about respect for the body. American culture often glorifies mental toughness while ignoring biological limits. But healing begins when you listen to the body without turning every sensation into a character flaw. You're not weak for struggling in a new climate. You're human in a system that evolved for predictability. If you're living in a place where the sky feels unfamiliar, where seasons hit harder than expected, pause and check in with your body. Not your motivation. Not your goals. Your body. Are you sleeping differently? Moving less? Seeing less daylight? These aren't excuses. They're inputs. And inputs shape outcomes. The climate didn't break me. My misunderstanding of it did. Once I stopped fighting my biology, adaptation became gentler. Not easy, but possible. Healing didn't start with mindset hacks. It started with acknowledging that the body adapts slower than ambition. In the end, the shock wasn't the cold or the heat. It was realizing that chasing a dream without accounting for the body turns progress into punishment. Your nervous system isn't sabotaging you. It's asking to be included in the plan. Culture doesn't hug you back. Culture shock didn't arrive loudly. It didn't announce itself with conflict or rejection. It slipped in quietly, disguised as politeness. Smiles everywhere. Doors held open. Voices calm. On the surface, everything felt respectful and smooth. Yet something essential was missing, and your nervous system noticed before your mind could explain it. In many cultures, connection is built through proximity. People talk loudly, interrupt, touch your arm, ask personal questions without apology. In the U.S., connection is built through boundaries. Space is respected. Privacy is sacred. Independence is admired. None of this is wrong. But when you grow up in a culture where closeness equals safety, Distance can feel like abandonment, even when it isn't. I remember having friendly conversations that ended too quickly. Let's hang out sometime, followed by no actual plan. Texts that stayed polite but vague. Invitations that sounded warm but never materialized. My rational brain understood, people are busy, schedules are full. My emotional brain interpreted something else, you don't belong enough to be included. That interpretation wasn't accurate, but it was powerful. Social neuroscience explains why this hurts. The brain's social pain network overlaps with physical pain circuits. Exclusion, real or perceived, activates the same regions as injury. When connection feels uncertain, the brain stays alert. Alert turns into hypervigilance. Hypervigilance feels like anxiety, overthinking, or emotional fatigue. You're not imagining it. Your brain is responding exactly as designed. American culture values self-sufficiency. Asking for help is allowed, but needing help is subtly discouraged. Emotional struggles are often framed as personal responsibility rather than collective concern. That mindset can feel liberating if you grew up constrained. It can feel isolating if you grew up held. I didn't realize how much unconscious co-regulation I lost until it was gone. Back home, presence regulated emotion. Here, independence was the default. Small interactions accumulated into quiet confusion. People were kind but distant. Friendly but unavailable. I started questioning my social skills. Was my accent wrong? My humor off? My energy too much, or not enough? That spiral is common. Cultural mismatch often gets internalized as personal inadequacy. Psychologists call this attribution error, blaming yourself for systemic differences. Loneliness in America often doesn't look like loneliness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel disconnected. You can have conversations without intimacy, interaction without attunement. This type of loneliness is harder to name because it lacks drama. There's no rejection letter. No clear exclusion. Just a subtle absence of resonance. Over time, that absence erodes confidence. Research on immigrant mental health shows that perceived social isolation predicts depression more strongly than financial stress. Not poverty. Not workload. Isolation. Humans are wired for mirroring, being seen, reflected, emotionally tracked. When that mirroring weakens, the nervous system interprets the environment as unsafe. Safety isn't about danger. It's about belonging. I noticed changes in myself. I spoke less. I shared selectively. I started editing my personality to fit the room. That adaptation felt smart at first. Then it felt hollow. When self-expression becomes strategic rather than spontaneous, emotional energy drains fast. You're not being fake. You're being careful. But careful living is exhausting. Understanding culture helped separate signal from noise. Americans often don't initiate because they don't want to impose. Silence isn't disinterest, it's respect. Distance isn't rejection, it's etiquette. Once I learned that, some pressure lifted. Not all, but enough. Misinterpretation fuels pain. Clarity reduces it. I also learned that deep connection in the U.S. often forms slowly and intentionally. Fewer relationships, deeper bonds. Less casual closeness, more chosen intimacy. That requires patience and vulnerability. Two things that are hard when your nervous system already feels unsettled. Healing began when I stopped expecting instant warmth and started building consistency instead. Practical shifts mattered. Joining structured communities where interaction was expected, classes, volunteer groups, shared routines, reduced ambiguity. Predictability calmed my social brain. I stopped chasing validation and started seeking alignment. Not everyone needed to like me. I just needed a few places where I didn't have to translate myself. The most important shift was internal. I stopped asking, why don't they connect like home, and started asking, how does connection work here? Curiosity replaced judgment. Observation replaced self-blame. Cultural fluency isn't assimilation. It's translation, without erasing yourself. If you're feeling unseen in a culture that smiles a lot but touches little, pause before concluding something is wrong with you. Cultural distance can feel like emotional coldness, but they're not the same. Your need for warmth isn't a flaw. It's a human requirement shaped by your history. Culture doesn't hug you back in America, not automatically. It waits. It watches. It requires intention. Once you understand that, you stop leaning into closed doors and start knocking on the right ones. The pain wasn't that people didn't care. The pain was expecting familiarity in a system built on formality. Belonging didn't disappear. It just spoke a different language. Policies shape daily stress. Stress in America didn't always come from dramatic events. It came from envelopes, emails, forms, deadlines written in small print. Policies don't shout, but they hover. Quietly. Constantly. And when your life depends on staying compliant, the nervous system never fully relaxes. Back home, bureaucracy was annoying but familiar. You knew where to go, who to ask, how things really worked beyond the official rules. In the U.S., policies are precise, formal, and unforgiving. Everything has a process. Everything has a consequence. Miss a date, misunderstand a line, forget a document, and the cost isn't just inconvenience. It's fear. Fear of losing stability. Fear of losing status. Fear of losing everything you worked for. What surprised me wasn't the rules themselves. It was how deeply they entered daily life. Immigration status, insurance coverage, tax classifications, employment conditions, these weren't background systems. They were ever-present mental tabs running in my head. Cognitive psychology calls this cognitive load, the amount of mental energy required to manage information. High cognitive load doesn't just tire the brain. It reduces emotional regulation, decision quality, and resilience. Each letter in the mail triggered a spike of alertness. Each official email tightened my chest before I even opened it. My body learned to associate paperwork with threat. That's not exaggeration, that's conditioning. When the stakes are survival level, the nervous system responds accordingly. Chronic low-grade fear becomes baseline stress. Baseline stress becomes identity. America prides itself on fairness through structure. Rules apply equally. Systems are standardized. That logic makes sense on paper. Emotionally, though, equal rules don't produce equal experiences. If you grew up fluent in the system, policies feel neutral. If you're learning them under pressure, they feel hostile. Not because they intend harm, but because they leave no room for context. Psychology explains this through the lens of perceived control. Stress increases dramatically when outcomes matter deeply but control feels limited. Immigrants often live in that exact zone. You do everything right, yet uncertainty remains. That uncertainty keeps the brain in threat detection mode. Cortisol stays elevated. Sleep quality drops. Patience thins. Over time, this state mimics anxiety disorders, without being irrational. I noticed how policy stress bled into relationships. Conversations felt rushed. Decisions felt heavy. I avoided rest because rest didn't feel earned. Productivity became a coping mechanism. If I stayed busy, I didn't have to feel vulnerable. Many people praise this as ambition. Neurologically, it's avoidance. The body stays in motion to outrun fear. Even good news carried tension. Approval notices brought relief followed immediately by countdown anxiety. When does this expire? What's next? Stability felt temporary. Temporary stability doesn't calm the nervous system. It keeps it braced. You're never fully here. You're always preparing for the next checkpoint. The cruelest part is how invisible this stress looks from the outside. You're employed. You're legal. You're functioning. People assume you're fine. Meanwhile, your internal world feels like a constant background hum of vigilance. This disconnect creates shame. Shame thrives in invisibility. You start believing you shouldn't feel this way because others don't see a problem. Understanding policy stress changed my self-perception. This wasn't personal fragility. It was structural pressure. Systems designed for efficiency don't account for emotional cost. Once I named that, the stress became contextual instead of internalized. Context turns chaos into information. Practical shifts helped. I externalized systems, calendars, reminders, checklists, so my brain didn't have to hold everything. I sought accurate information instead of worst-case speculation. Uncertainty feeds anxiety, clarity reduces it. Even partial clarity helps. The brain relaxes when it knows what to expect, not necessarily when it likes it. More importantly, I stopped equating worth with compliance. Policies govern status, not humanity. That distinction matters. When your identity fuses with paperwork outcomes, every delay feels like rejection. Separating self-worth from system response was an act of psychological survival. American systems reward self-advocacy, but they rarely teach it. Learning to ask questions, request clarification, and seek support reduced helplessness. Control doesn't require dominance. It requires orientation. Orientation tells the nervous system where it stands. If policies are shaping your daily stress, notice how your body reacts, not just your thoughts. Tight shoulders. Shallow breath. Jaw tension. These aren't character flaws. They're adaptive responses to prolonged uncertainty. Adaptation isn't weakness. It's intelligence under pressure. The goal isn't to eliminate policy stress. That's unrealistic. The goal is to stop letting it define your internal climate. Systems can govern behavior without governing identity. Once that line is drawn, breathing becomes easier. In the end, policies didn't crush me. Misunderstanding their psychological weight did. Rules organize society, but they shouldn't colonize the nervous system. You're navigating a system, not proving your value to it. Work hard, feel empty. Hard work in America is praised like a moral virtue. Productivity isn't just something you do, it's who you are allowed to be. From the outside, this looks motivating. From the inside, it can quietly hollow you out. I didn't arrive in the U.S. lazy or confused. I arrived ready to give everything. And I did. What I didn't expect was how empty success could feel when it's disconnected from meaning. Work became my anchor. When everything else felt unfamiliar, culture, climate, systems, work offered structure. Clear expectations. Measurable results. Do this, get that. The brain loves predictability, especially under stress. Neuroscience shows that achievement triggers dopamine, the chemical of reward and motivation. Dopamine feels good, but it's short-lived. It pushes you to do more, not to feel fulfilled. I didn't know that difference then. I started chasing productivity the way people chase oxygen. Early mornings. Late nights. Minimal breaks. I told myself this was discipline. Society reinforced it. Compliments came easily, you're so hardworking. What no one saw was the growing numbness. Joy didn't arrive with raises. Relief didn't last after milestones. Each win reset the bar higher. Dopamine kept me moving, but it didn't let me rest. Psychologists describe this pattern as effort-reward imbalance. When effort consistently outweighs emotional reward, burnout emerges. Burnout isn't laziness. It's the nervous system shutting down non-essential functions to survive. Creativity drops. Curiosity fades. Emotional range narrows. You still perform, but you stop feeling alive while doing it. What made it confusing was that nothing was wrong. Bills were paid. Goals were met. Objectively, life improved. Subjectively, it flattened. This is where many people gaslight themselves. You think you're ungrateful for wanting more than stability. But stability without meaning doesn't nourish the psyche. Humans aren't machines. We don't run on output alone. American culture often links self-worth to occupation. The question, what do you do, carries more weight than it appears. Identity merges with productivity. When work becomes the primary source of validation, emptiness is inevitable. Validation is external and conditional. Meaning is internal and stable. I confused the two for a long time. I noticed how rest started to feel uncomfortable. Days off produced guilt instead of relief. My body didn't know how to slow down without anxiety. This is a nervous system conditioned to equate safety with motion. Trauma researchers note that constant activity can be a form of freeze disguised as drive. You keep moving so you don't have to feel uncertainty. Relationships suffered quietly. Conversations became transactional. Presence diminished. I was physically there but mentally optimizing the next task. Emotional availability declined, not because I didn't care, but because my internal resources were depleted. When work consumes all regulation capacity, nothing is left for connection. The turning point came with an unsettling realization. I was successful by external standards and disconnected internally. That contradiction demanded attention. Emptiness isn't failure. It's information. It signals misalignment between values and behavior. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It just deepens. Understanding the neurobiology helped. Dopamine-driven systems reward effort, not fulfillment. Fulfillment relies more on oxytocin, serotonin, and meaning-making, chemicals released through connection, contribution, and coherence. Work alone can't supply those consistently. No amount of productivity replaces belonging. Small changes shifted things. I stopped glorifying exhaustion. I began measuring days by presence, not output. Micro moments of meaning mattered: unhurried meals, intentional conversations, creative expression without monetization. These weren't indulgences. They were regulation tools. I also redefined success. Not as constant advancement, but as sustainable engagement. Burnout thrives on the belief that rest must be earned. Healing begins when rest is seen as maintenance. Machines break without maintenance. Humans dissociate. If you're working harder than ever and feeling emptier than before, pause before assuming something is wrong with you. Emptiness is often the cost of chasing goals that don't feed the parts of you doing the chasing. Ambition without alignment leads to motion without direction. The American dream celebrates hustle. It rarely teaches integration. Integration means work supports life, not replaces it. When work becomes the sole source of identity, it can't carry the weight. It collapses inward. In the end, hard work didn't betray me. Confusing productivity with purpose did. Achievement can move you forward, but only meaning tells you why. Without that why, even success feels like an empty room. Love under pressure. Love didn't break suddenly. It compressed. Slowly. Quietly. Like air being squeezed out of a sealed room. The pressure came from everywhere else: work, money, paperwork, adaptation, and love was where it leaked. Not because love was weak, but because it was carrying weight it was never meant to hold alone. When two people move to a new country together, they don't just bring luggage. They bring unspoken expectations. Hope that love will soften the shock. Belief that being together will make everything easier. In reality, relocation amplifies everything already present. Strengths become visible. Cracks become unavoidable. Stress doesn't create problems, it reveals them. In America, survival often demands efficiency. Schedules tighten. Priorities shift. Conversations become logistical. Who pays what? Who handles which document? Who sacrifices which dream first? Emotional check-ins slowly get replaced by task updates. This isn't neglect. It's adaptation under pressure. But the nervous system doesn't care about intention. It registers distance. Psychology shows that chronic stress reduces emotional attunement. The brain redirects resources from connection to problem solving. Empathy decreases. Patience thins. Partners begin interpreting stress responses as personal rejection. One withdraws to cope. The other pursues for reassurance. This dynamic, known as the pursue-withdraw cycle, creates conflict without villains. I noticed how silence changed tone. What used to feel comfortable began to feel heavy. Minor disagreements escalated faster. Not because issues were larger, but because emotional bandwidth was smaller. When the nervous system is overloaded, even gentle feedback can feel like attack. Defense replaces curiosity. Love becomes a negotiation rather than a refuge. Cultural context mattered too. American culture emphasizes individual resilience. Struggle is something you manage privately. That message seeped into our relationship. We stopped co-regulating, stopping sharing emotional weight, and started self-managing. Independence masqueraded as strength. Disconnection quietly grew. Research on attachment under stress shows that uncertainty heightens attachment needs. When the environment feels unsafe, partners look to each other for stability. If both are depleted, neither can provide it. That mismatch breeds resentment. Why aren't you supporting me? Becomes I don't have anything left to give. Love under immigration pressure often becomes transactional without anyone choosing it. Survival roles replace relational roles. One becomes the planner. The other the supporter. Over time, identity narrows. You stop being partners in growth and become teammates in endurance. Endurance keeps you alive. It doesn't make you close. The most painful part wasn't conflict. It was misunderstanding. We loved each other, yet felt unseen. Each assumed the other had changed. In truth, both were exhausted. Exhaustion distorts perception. It convinces you that distance is intentional rather than circumstantial. Understanding the nervous system changed how I interpreted love. Emotional availability isn't a moral trait. It's a capacity. Capacity shrinks under chronic stress. That reframing softened blame. It created space for compassion where accusation used to live. Small adjustments mattered more than grand gestures. Scheduled check-ins without problem-solving. Touch without agenda. Naming stress instead of arguing content. Neuroscience confirms that co-regulation, shared calm, restores safety faster than solutions. Feeling safe precedes feeling connected. We learn to stop asking, who's right, and start asking, who's regulated. Arguments lost intensity when regulation became the goal. Connection returned in fragments at first. Brief moments of laughter. Shared silence without tension. These weren't signs of weakness. They were signs of healing. Love in America doesn't fail because people stop caring. It strains because systems pull attention outward while relationships require inward focus. Without intention, love becomes collateral damage of adaptation. With awareness, it becomes an anchor. If your relationship feels heavier since moving, pause before concluding love is gone. Pressure changes behavior, not truth. Love doesn't disappear under stress, it hides behind survival mechanisms. Those mechanisms can be unlearned. The dream sold independence. Love requires interdependence. When survival crowds intimacy, connection needs structure, not sacrifice. Under pressure, love doesn't need more effort, it needs more understanding. Family expectations collide. Family didn't disappear when I moved to America. It multiplied. Not in people, but in pressure. Expectations crossed oceans faster than my body ever could. They arrived through phone calls, messages, silences, and questions that sounded caring but landed heavy. Family love doesn't weaken with distance, it often intensifies, then collides with a life that no longer fits the same shape. Back home, family expectations were woven into daily life. Roles were clear. Sacrifice was normal. Proximity softened misunderstandings because presence filled the gaps. In America, distance stripped away that buffer. What remained were expectations without context. Advice without visibility. Concern without shared reality. The emotional math changed. I noticed how every decision carried invisible witnesses. Career choices. Spending habits. Marriage dynamics. Even rest felt scrutinized. Not directly, but energetically. Family systems theory explains this well. Families maintain emotional balance through shared norms. When one member leaves the system, tension increases. The system tries to pull them back, not physically, but psychologically. In immigrant families, success often becomes a collective investment. Your progress represents everyone's hope. That sounds supportive until it becomes heavy. Pressure doesn't need criticism to exist. It lives in unspoken comparisons, in stories of others who made it, in subtle reminders of sacrifice. Gratitude turns into obligation. Obligation quietly erodes autonomy. American culture emphasizes individual choice. Family culture often emphasizes collective responsibility. Living between those two value systems creates internal conflict. You're told to do what's best for you, while also being reminded of who depends on you. The brain struggles to reconcile incompatible rules. That struggle manifests as guilt. Guilt is a powerful regulator. Neuroscience shows it activates threat circuits tied to social survival. Historically, exclusion from the group meant danger. So when family expectations clash with personal needs, the nervous system reacts as if survival is at stake. You don't just feel bad, you feel unsafe. I noticed how guilt shaped behavior. Overworking to justify choices. Over-explaining to reduce imagined disappointment. Withholding struggles to avoid worrying others. That last one is especially damaging. Emotional suppression disconnects you from support while increasing internal load. You protect others at the cost of self-regulation. Family conversations became layered. On the surface, updates sounded positive. Underneath, tension accumulated. Everything's fine became a shield. Psychologists call this emotional cutoff, a strategy to manage overwhelm by limiting vulnerability. It reduces conflict but increases loneliness. Marriage sat right in the middle of this collision. Different cultural expectations about roles, loyalty, and priorities surfaced. Who comes first, partner or family? In some cultures, the answer is obvious. In America, it's negotiable. Negotiation without shared assumptions creates friction. Love gets caught between value systems it didn't choose. I realized how often I confused love with compliance. Saying yes felt safer than explaining no. But every unspoken boundary increased resentment. Resentment doesn't explode immediately. It calcifies. Over time, it hardens into emotional distance. Understanding family systems changed my interpretation. Family pressure wasn't manipulation. It was anxiety. Anxiety about losing connection. Anxiety about relevance. Anxiety about a changing world they couldn't see firsthand. Naming that softened my response. Compassion replaced defensiveness, but compassion didn't mean surrender. Boundaries became essential. Not walls, filters. Clear, calm explanations. Repeated when necessary. Boundaries reduce anxiety by restoring predictability. They tell both sides what to expect. Family systems calm down when rules are clear, even if they don't love the rules. I learned to separate disappointment from danger. Family disappointment feels intense, but it isn't fatal. The nervous system needs that reminder. You can survive someone else's discomfort. Growth requires tolerating misalignment without collapsing. Small shifts helped. Sharing context instead of outcomes. Explaining the why, not just the what. Allowing myself to be misunderstood temporarily. Family adaptation lags behind individual change. Expecting instant understanding is unrealistic. The hardest part was releasing the role of emotional translator for everyone. You're allowed to live without narrating every choice. Privacy isn't betrayal. It's regulation. When I stopped over-functioning emotionally, Relationships slowly recalibrated. Family expectations don't vanish in America. They transform. The challenge isn't choosing between family and self. It's integrating both without losing either. That integration takes time, clarity, and courage. If you feel torn between who you were raised to be and who you're becoming, pause before labeling it selfishness. It's differentiation, the process of becoming an adult while staying connected. Differentiation feels uncomfortable because it rewires emotional patterns built over decades. The conflict wasn't about love. It was about outdated maps applied to new terrain. Family didn't mean to hold me back. They just didn't know where I was standing. The political divide inside home. Politics didn't enter my life in America through rallies or television debates. It entered through dinner conversations. Through pauses. Through carefully chosen words. Through the moment you realize that the person sitting across from you interprets the same reality through a completely different lens, and believes. That lens is obvious. In the U.S., politics isn't just policy. It's identity. Values. Morality. Belonging. The system encourages people to sort themselves into camps, then defend those camps emotionally. For someone who came from outside, this was disorienting. I wasn't just learning a new political structure. I was learning how deeply politics lives inside people's sense of self. At first, I tried to stay neutral. Observe. Listen. Not engage too deeply. Neutrality felt safe. But neutrality has a cost. When you don't take a visible position, others project one onto you. Silence gets interpreted. Caution looks like avoidance. Suddenly, conversations felt tense even when no one raised their voice. Inside my home, the divide grew quietly. Different news sources. Different interpretations of fairness, responsibility, freedom. Topics once casual became loaded. A single word could derail an evening. We weren't fighting about facts, we were protecting identities. Psychology calls this identity protective cognition. The brain prioritizes belonging over accuracy. When beliefs are challenged, the nervous system reacts as if under attack. That reaction isn't intellectual. It's biological. Political disagreement activates the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. Once activated, logic shuts down. Listening becomes difficult. Curiosity disappears. What remains is defense. This explains why political conversations escalate so quickly, even among people who love each other. As an immigrant, I felt caught between worlds. My perspective didn't fit neatly into either side. I carried memories of different systems, different consequences. That nuance didn't always land well. Nuance is uncomfortable in polarized environments. It slows certainty. Certainty feels safe. So nuance often gets dismissed. The stress wasn't just external. It became internal. I started editing myself. Avoiding topics. Choosing peace over honesty. That strategy works short-term, but long-term it fragments identity. When you consistently hide parts of your perspective, your nervous system registers inauthenticity. Inauthenticity breeds tension. Research in relational psychology shows that unresolved value conflicts increase emotional distance more than logistical conflicts. You can compromise on schedules. You can't easily compromise on meaning. Meaning is tied to who you believe you are. When partners or family members hold incompatible meanings, relationships strain, not because of disagreement, but because of fear of invalidation. I noticed how quickly conversations shifted from "what do you think?" to "what kind of person are you?" That shift is dangerous. It turns dialogue into threat assessment. Once character feels judged, safety disappears. And without safety, connection collapses. Understanding this changed how I engaged. The goal stopped being persuasion. It became regulation. Staying calm mattered more than being right. Naming emotions mattered more than debating facts. This feels important to you. Open doors that you're wrong slammed shut. Neuroscience supports this. Validation calms the nervous system, making listening possible. Inside the home, we created boundaries around timing and tone. Not every moment is suitable for heavy conversations. Regulation precedes discussion. When stress is already high, from work, finances, or adaptation, political debate becomes combustible. Choosing when not to engage isn't avoidance. It's wisdom. I also had to confront my own rigidity. Feeling misunderstood can harden beliefs. I wasn't immune. The urge to defend my perspective intensified under pressure. Self-awareness mattered. Noticing when I was arguing to connect versus arguing to win changed outcomes. Winning doesn't build intimacy. Understanding sometimes does. America's political climate thrives on division because division drives engagement. Algorithms reward outrage. Outrage dysregulates nervous systems. Dysregulated people seek certainty. Certainty often comes packaged as ideology. This cycle doesn't stay online. It follows people home. Breaking that cycle at home required intention. Shared values beyond politics helped: kindness, safety, dignity. Returning to those anchors reduced polarization. You can disagree on solutions while agreeing on care. That distinction gets lost easily. If political tension is affecting your relationships, pause before assuming incompatibility. Often, it's not beliefs that separate people, it's unmanaged fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing identity. Fear of being erased. Fear doesn't respond to arguments. It responds to safety. Learning to hold political difference without personal threat is a skill. A nervous system skill. It requires slowing down, softening tone, and remembering that disagreement isn't abandonment. That reminder doesn't come naturally in polarized environments. It must be practiced. The divide inside the home wasn't caused by politics alone. It was amplified by stress, uncertainty, and identity under pressure. When systems polarize, relationships need regulation, not more debate. Understanding didn't change opinions. It changed the atmosphere where opinions lived. My nervous system burned out. Burnout didn't arrive as collapse. There was no dramatic breakdown, no moment where I couldn't get out of bed. It arrived as numbness. Quiet. Functional. Deceptive. I was still showing up, still performing, still checking boxes, but something essential had gone offline. My nervous system wasn't broken. It was exhausted from pretending everything was normal. For a long time, I thought burnout meant hating your job or feeling constantly overwhelmed. That wasn't my experience. I felt strangely flat. Nothing was terribly wrong, but nothing felt right either. Joy became muted. Curiosity faded. Even rest felt unsatisfying. This is what chronic stress looks like when the body stops sounding alarms and starts conserving energy instead. Neuroscience explains this clearly. The nervous system has limited capacity. When stress is short-term, the body mobilizes and recovers. When stress is long-term and unpredictable, new country, new rules, constant vigilance, the system adapts by lowering sensitivity. This is called hypoarousal. You're not anxious anymore because anxiety requires energy. You're tired, disconnected, running on minimum power mode. I didn't recognize it at first because productivity masked it. I was still efficient, still responsible, still doing well. But internally, motivation had shifted from desire to obligation. I wasn't moving toward things. I was avoiding consequences. That's a critical difference. One is driven by growth, the other by fear. Small signs appeared. I stopped enjoying conversations I once loved. Music felt less immersive. Food tasted fine but not memorable. These aren't personality changes. They're nervous system signals. When the brain is overloaded, it prioritizes survival functions and downregulates pleasure. Dopamine becomes scarce. Serotonin drops. Emotional range narrows. Burnout is often misdiagnosed as laziness or depression. The distinction matters. Depression involves hopelessness and self-criticism. Burnout involves depletion and detachment. I didn't think I was worthless. I just felt empty. Empty is harder to explain, so people push through it. Pushing through is what deepens burnout. Immigration accelerates this process. Every day requires micro-adjustments, language shifts, cultural interpretation, risk assessment. Each adjustment is small, but cumulative. The nervous system never fully stands down. There's no true off switch. Over time, constant low-level activation exhausts regulation capacity. I noticed how my body reacted before my mind caught up. Tight jaw. Shallow breathing. Constant fatigue even after sleep. These are signs of autonomic imbalance. The sympathetic system, the one responsible for action, was overused. The parasympathetic system, the one responsible for rest, was underutilized. Balance disappeared. What made it worse was self-judgment. I told myself I should be stronger, more grateful, less sensitive. That inner dialogue added a second layer of stress. Research shows that self-criticism activates the same threat pathways as external criticism. My nervous system was under attack from both sides. The turning point wasn't motivation. It was education. Learning how the nervous system works changed everything. Burnout wasn't a failure of character. It was a predictable outcome of prolonged adaptation without adequate recovery. That reframe removed shame. Shame is fuel for burnout. Understanding interrupts the cycle. Recovery didn't start with big changes. It started with regulation. Slower mornings. Consistent sleep timing. Gentle movement instead of intense workouts. These sound small, almost trivial. They're not. Regulation happens at the physiological level first. You can't think your way out of a dysregulated body. I also reduced decision load. Fewer choices conserve nervous system energy. Simpler routines created predictability. Predictability signals safety. Safety allows the nervous system to relax. Relaxation restores capacity. This is how healing actually works, quietly, gradually, without drama. Emotionally, I stopped forcing positivity. Burnout doesn't need optimism. It needs permission to be depleted without consequence. Letting myself feel flat without trying to fix it paradoxically brought relief. The body relaxes when it's not being pressured to perform wellness. Connection helped, but only regulated connection. Loud environments drained me. Calm presence restored me. Co-regulation is powerful. Sitting with someone who feels safe can downshift the nervous system faster than any technique. Healing isn't always solitary. It's often relational. Over time, color returned. Not all at once. In fragments. A laugh that lingered. Interest that reappeared. Energy that didn't immediately vanish. These were signs of recovery. Not peak performance, baseline humanity. If you're functioning but numb, pause before labeling yourself unmotivated. Numbness is a protective response. Your nervous system isn't giving up. It's conserving resources until conditions improve. You can help those conditions by reducing pressure, not increasing effort. Burnout taught me something essential. Resilience isn't endless output. It's flexible regulation. Knowing when to push and when to pause. America rewards endurance. The nervous system requires rhythm. Without rhythm, endurance becomes erosion. The collapse never came because the system adapted just enough to survive. But survival without vitality isn't living. Recovery began when I stopped demanding more and started listening better. My nervous system didn't betray me. It carried me until it couldn't anymore. Burnout wasn't a weakness, it was a message. And the message was simple. You can't heal in the same mode that hurt you. Relearning safety inside my own body. Healing didn't feel like progress at first. It felt like slowness. Like resistance. Like my body refusing to cooperate with my plans. After burnout, ambition no longer translated into action. That wasn't failure. It was my nervous system renegotiating terms. Before any forward motion could return, safety had to be rebuilt from the inside out. For years, my body associated movement with threat. Speed meant pressure. Achievement meant exposure. Rest felt suspicious, as if something bad might happen if I stopped paying attention. These associations weren't conscious beliefs. They were conditioned responses. Trauma doesn't live in thoughts. It lives in patterns of sensation and reaction. The first task was learning how to feel safe without productivity as proof. That sounds simple. It's not. In a culture that measures worth by output, stillness can trigger anxiety. I noticed it immediately. When I slowed down, my chest tightened. My mind searched for reasons to get busy again. This wasn't laziness. It was withdrawal from adrenaline. Chronic stress trains the body to rely on stress hormones for energy. When those hormones decrease, fatigue surfaces. The system feels weak, even though it's actually recovering. This phase is uncomfortable and often misunderstood. Many people restart stress just to feel normal again. I almost did. Instead, I learned to stay. To tolerate the discomfort of calm. That required education and patience. Polyvagal theory explains it well. The nervous system seeks safety through cues, tone of voice, posture, rhythm. I began offering those cues to myself intentionally. Softer speech. Slower movements. Predictable routines. These weren't self-help tricks. They were physiological negotiations. Breath became a tool. Not deep breathing for performance, but gentle breathing for reassurance. Longer exhales signaled safety to the vagus nerve. Over time, my heart rate variability improved. That's a measurable sign of resilience. The body was relearning flexibility. I also had to rebuild trust with my emotions. During burnout, feelings flattened. During recovery, they returned unevenly. Sadness arrived before joy. Irritability before enthusiasm. This is normal. The nervous system releases stored stress in layers. I stopped judging the order. Emotions aren't problems to solve. They're signals to listen to. Boundaries became essential. Not dramatic ones, quiet ones. Leaving early. Saying no without explanation. Protecting mornings. These choices reduced sensory load. Less input allowed more integration. The nervous system processes experiences during rest, not activity. Without rest, learning doesn't consolidate. Healing doesn't either. Socially, I changed how I connected. Fewer interactions. Deeper ones. I noticed which conversations regulated me and which depleted me. This wasn't about people being good or bad. It was about nervous system compatibility. Some dynamics require constant self-monitoring. That's expensive. Others allow natural presence. Those are restorative. Shame tried to interfere. It whispered that I was becoming smaller. Less driven. Less impressive. That voice belonged to an older survival strategy. I acknowledged it without obeying it. The body doesn't need impressiveness. It needs consistency. Safety grows from reliability, not intensity. Movement shifted too. I replaced high-intensity workouts with walking and stretching. This wasn't a downgrade. It was recalibration. Gentle movement restores interoception, the ability to sense internal states. Burnout disrupts that ability. Rebuilding it helps the nervous system feel inhabited again. Sleep changed gradually. At first, it was fragmented. Then deeper. Then more refreshing. Sleep architecture repairs itself when threat perception decreases. No supplement did that. Reduced vigilance did. Nights stopped being recovery missions and became rest again. Mentally, clarity returned in flashes. Short windows where thinking felt light. Those windows expanded with time. Cognitive function improves when the prefrontal cortex isn't hijacked by stress responses. This isn't motivation. It's biology. Once safety increased, focus followed naturally. I learned to pace ambition. Instead of asking how much I could do, I asked how regulated I could stay. That question changed everything. Sustainable effort feels different. It doesn't require force. It doesn't leave residue. It allows recovery within the same day. There were setbacks. Stressful weeks reactivated old patterns. The difference was awareness. I recognized the signals sooner. Tight shoulders. Short temper. Mental fog. Awareness creates choice. Choice prevents collapse. Gradually, my identity shifted. I stopped defining myself by endurance. I started valuing responsiveness. Being able to adjust. To rest without guilt. To engage without depletion. That's real resilience. The nervous system isn't an obstacle to success. It's the foundation of it. Ignoring it produces temporary results at long-term cost. Honoring it produces slower gains that compound. This isn't a motivational slogan. It's observable physiology. By relearning safety, I didn't become passive. I became precise. Energy returned with direction. Not scattered. Not frantic. Calm energy lasts longer. It creates better decisions. It allows creativity to surface without pressure. Healing didn't make me softer in a way that broke me. It made me softer in a way that protected me. Strength without regulation is brittle. Regulation turns strength into sustainability. My body wasn't resisting progress. It was asking for conditions where progress could survive. Once those conditions existed, movement returned on its own. Not as urgency, but as readiness. Learning to trust slow progress. Progress looked different after everything fell quiet. It no longer arrived as milestones or dramatic wins. It arrived as tolerance. As steadiness. As the ability to stay present without forcing momentum. At first, that felt unsatisfying. I had been trained to equate progress with acceleration. Slow movement felt like regression, even when my body was clearly stabilizing. The challenge wasn't lack of effort. It was recalibrating my expectations. Burnout distorted my sense of time. Urgency had dominated for so long that anything gentle felt insufficient. My nervous system needed gradual exposure to effort, not pressure. Trusting that process required unlearning a lifetime of conditioning. I noticed how deeply impatience was embedded in me. When results didn't appear quickly, tension rose. My jaw tightened. My thoughts raced. These reactions weren't about the task. They were about safety. Speed had become a coping strategy. Slowness felt unsafe because it removed distraction. Learning to trust slow progress meant staying with discomfort without rushing to escape it. That's harder than it sounds. Stillness amplifies sensation. You notice doubts more clearly. You hear internal criticism louder. Moving fast keeps those voices blurred. Slowing down brings them into focus. I began observing my reactions instead of correcting them. When impatience surfaced, I didn't argue with it. I treated it as information. Something in me still believed that worth depended on visible output. That belief wasn't intellectual. It was somatic. It lived in muscle tension and breath patterns. Small routines became anchors. Waking at the same time. Eating consistently. Working in short, contained blocks. These weren't productivity hacks. They were trust-building exercises. Predictability teaches the nervous system that effort won't lead to overwhelm. Over time, capacity increases naturally when fear decreases. I also learned to measure progress differently. Instead of asking what I accomplished, I asked how I felt while doing it. Was I present or dissociated? Curious or braced? Energized or depleted? These metrics mattered more than volume. They predicted sustainability. There were days when I did very little. Old instincts labeled those days as wasted. New awareness reframed them as integration days. Growth doesn't happen only during action. It consolidates during pauses. Muscles repair during rest. Learning stabilizes during sleep. The nervous system works the same way. Trusting slow progress required letting go of comparison. Watching others move faster triggered old anxiety. I reminded myself that speed without regulation leads to crashes I had already lived through. My pace wasn't inferior. It was informed. Emotionally, patience created space for subtle joy. Not excitement, but contentment. A sense of being okay without needing proof. This was unfamiliar. I had chased highs for so long that neutrality felt strange. Over time, neutrality became grounding. From there, genuine interest reemerged. Mistakes became less threatening. When you're not rushing, errors don't feel catastrophic. They feel informative. That shift reduced defensiveness. Learning accelerated precisely because I wasn't trying to force it. Paradoxically, slow progress moved me forward more reliably. I paid attention to recovery signals. How quickly I bounced back from effort. How long tension lingered. These signals guided pacing. Ignoring them in the past had cost me months. Listening to them now saved energy. Respecting limits didn't shrink my world. It stabilized it. Trust also meant allowing motivation to fluctuate. Some days felt engaged. Others felt flat. I stopped interpreting fluctuation as failure. Biological systems aren't linear. Expecting constant drive is unrealistic. Accepting rhythm reduced internal conflict. Social pressure challenged this trust. Well-meaning advice emphasized pushing harder. I learned to filter suggestions through my own body. If advice increased tension, I set it aside. If it felt neutral or supportive, I considered it. Authority shifted inward. That was a major change. I also noticed how language shaped perception. Replacing "I should be further" with "I'm building capacity" changed my posture instantly. Words influence physiology. Compassionate framing reduces threat response. Reduced threat allows learning. Over time, evidence accumulated. I didn't crash after effort anymore. I recovered faster. Focus lasted longer. Creativity returned without force. These weren't dramatic transformations. They were quiet confirmations that the pace was working. Trusting slow progress required faith without urgency. Not blind faith, but informed patience. I had data now, my own nervous system's responses. That data mattered more than timelines imposed from outside. Eventually, slowness stopped feeling like restraint and started feeling like precision. Each step was intentional. Energy wasn't wasted fighting myself. Progress became cumulative instead of costly. The most surprising realization was this: slow progress felt safer, but it also felt more honest. It reflected where I actually was, not where I thought I should be. That honesty removed internal friction. Without friction, movement became smoother. I didn't lose ambition. I refined it. I stopped chasing speed and started cultivating durability. Trust grew not from intensity, but from consistency. And consistency, practiced gently, carried me further than force ever did. Choosing a dream that can breathe. The ending didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with clarity. Quiet, grounded clarity that felt almost anticlimactic after everything I had carried. For a long time, I believed the American dream was something you either achieved or failed. That binary kept me stuck. It framed life as a verdict instead of a process. Only later did I understand that the real decision wasn't whether the dream was real, but whether it was mine. By the time stability returned, my definition of success had already changed. The old dream was loud. It demanded constant proof. Growth, income, status, forward motion, always visible, always measurable. It rewarded endurance, not awareness. That dream didn't make space for recovery. It didn't care whether your nervous system could keep up. It only cared whether you could perform. What I wanted instead was a life that could breathe. A rhythm that expanded and contracted without collapse. A version of success that didn't punish rest or shame slowness. Choosing that meant letting go of external validation. It meant tolerating the discomfort of not fitting a familiar narrative. That discomfort was real, but it was clean. It didn't corrode from the inside. Understanding healed more than motivation ever did. Once I stopped framing my struggles as personal failure, my energy returned naturally. Neuroscience explains why. When the brain perceives safety, it reallocates resources toward creativity, connection, and learning. Threat narrows focus. Safety widens it. Healing wasn't about becoming stronger. It was about becoming safer inside my own body. I also saw how the American dream functions differently depending on where you stand. Climate, culture, policy, and social systems shape experience more than effort alone. Acknowledging that wasn't an excuse. It was accuracy. Accurate stories reduce shame. They help you adapt without self-blame. Healing thrives in truth, not optimism. Relationships reflected that shift too. Love felt lighter when it wasn't competing with survival. Communication softened. We stopped measuring commitment by sacrifice and started measuring it by regulation. Conflict didn't disappear, but it lost its edge. When you're not fighting the environment, you don't turn your partner into the enemy. Family dynamics shifted as well. I no longer tried to prove that coming here was worth it. Worth stopped being something I defended. It became something I experienced quietly. The pressure to justify choices dissolved. Peace replaced persuasion. Choosing a dream that could breathe also meant redefining ambition. Ambition became alignment rather than accumulation. I aimed for work that matched my capacity instead of stretching it until it tore. That didn't limit growth. It stabilized it. Sustainable effort compounds. Unsustainable effort resets. I learned to ask different questions. Not how fast can I get there, but what pace keeps me whole. Not does this impress, but does this regulate? These questions filtered decisions efficiently. They reduced regret. They honored reality. The happy ending wasn't perfection. It was coherence. My values matched my actions more often than not. My body trusted my choices. That trust created momentum that didn't feel forced. Joy emerged quietly, without chasing. I understood then that the American dream isn't fake. It's incomplete. It sells possibility without teaching capacity. It celebrates arrival without acknowledging cost. When you add understanding, the dream becomes customizable. You get to choose what stays and what goes. Healing didn't erase hardship. It changed my relationship to it. Difficulty no longer meant danger. It meant engagement. Growth no longer required self-abandonment. It required self-awareness. That distinction changed everything. If you're standing where I once stood, questioning the dream, doubting yourself, pause before concluding you're broken. Confusion is often a sign of transition, not failure. Your system may be asking for recalibration, not resignation. The most powerful choice I made wasn't staying or leaving. It was redefining success on my own terms. Understanding didn't just heal me. It gave me permission to build a life that fit. The dream didn't disappear. It learned how to breathe. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, it's probably because part of it is already yours. Not the country. Not the dream itself. But the quiet question underneath it all, am I living a life that actually fits me? This channel isn't about chasing motivation highs or selling perfect endings. It's about understanding, because understanding heals. It's about slowing down enough to hear yourself again, especially when the world keeps telling you to run faster. In the next videos, we'll go deeper into life in the U.S. Identity shifts, relationships under pressure, healing after burnout, and redefining success without losing yourself. Not theory. Not hype. Just real stories, real psychology, and real growth, one honest step at a time. If you felt seen, understood, or even slightly uncomfortable in a good way, that's your sign. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Like the video to help this message reach someone who needs it tonight. And share it with a friend who's quietly questioning their own version of the dream. Because the American dream isn't about proving anything. It's about choosing a life that can breathe. And this conversation? It's only getting started.